welcome to Truth and Justice with Vivian King. We are going to open tonight's case with Attorney Paul Kendall. He has been gracious enough to come in tonight to tell us about a case that he just won in County Court number 14. It was a resisting arrest about his client that we will call either John Doe or Joe. But we will be calling him John or Joe all night long, so don't get distracted with that. Get distracted with our education for tonight. So tonight, hopefully, we'll learn a little bit more about the Harris County criminal justice system through Paul's case. Attorney Paul Kendall has been practicing since 2007. He practices only criminal law with a lot of great criminal lawyers. He is well known in the courthouse and well respected, so I turn it over to you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So tell us about that victory last week, a couple of weeks ago.
Well, first of all, I was impressed when you invited me. You asked me to talk about or to come on and discuss my client's story.
Yes.
And that's what's, winning the trial was kind of the easy part. This wasn't a difficult trial, although we do take all trials very seriously. We don't underestimate our opponent by any means. But the real story here is what happened to my client and what he went through the night that he got arrested, in addition to what he went through up until the trial date and the trial. And I give him a lot of credit for sticking with me and trusting me when I said, if they don't dismiss this, we're going to go to trial.
Wow. Because our clients are a lot of times afraid of that. If they're little people,
absolutely,
without a lot of money or influence, they'd rather
absolutely
just take the deal.
And I think people like you just described, little money, little influence, perceptively little people, aren't expected to fight cases. Mm-hmm. And I think, for lack of a better word, little BS cases like this one are the ones that the police officers in particular don't ever expect anyone will fight. And I think that's part of what happened in this case. But I guess I'll just start by telling you what happened the night he was arrested.
Tell us the story, yeah, whatever you want to say.
So my client, Joe, was out on a Saturday night, January 24th, 2015, with his wife and a friend. On the way to a sports bar, they stopped. My client bought a can of beer, and this not being New Orleans, he could not walk around with this beer and go into a restaurant. So they got to the sports bar. He walks into the restaurant drinking a beer and was turned away.
Is he from New Orleans?
No, he's not. No, he's not. But I can't think of anywhere else where he could have pulled this off, and I don't know what he was thinking. Exactly. Well, true. I don't know what he was thinking on this night, but if he wanted to get the attention of the two police officers who were working security that night, he figured out a good way of doing it. Because if you walk in drinking a beer, they're going to notice you. So they turned him around, told him he couldn't come in with the beer. He goes out to dump it. On his way back in, they see that he notices that his friend is in a heated argument with some other guys at the bar. And they told my client, get your friend out of here, in so many words, or he's going to get hurt.
So who says that?
The other guys that they're talking to.
Okay, not the security guards.
Not the security guards. The security guards are still sitting inside during this,
okay,
all of this, which is important because where they were sitting, they could not hear or see a lot of the things that they would later purport to have been able to hear and see. But we know that police officers see and smell and hear things that they couldn't possibly.
That the rest of us don't hear and smell and see when we're in the same
I couldn't smell marijuana before I even get out of my car in a car that's 20 feet in front of me, but some officers can do that. So, right.
Every day they do it.
Oh, every day, right. So my client tries to get his friend to just come home. Let's just go, let's go. And he's pulling at his arm, but there's no altercation, there's no anger. It's important that the entire conversation between my client and his friend is in Spanish, because later, the officer will say that he saw what was going on and he heard what was going on, but and he was certain that a fight was about to break out, so that's why he had to intercede. But he also admitted that he didn't speak Spanish and he had no idea what these guys were talking about outside. So, in the process of trying to get his friend to come home, an officer comes out and says, get out of here. Same officer that turned him away earlier. He continued to try to get his friend to come along, and then he gave up, and he and his wife walked off. His story is that at that point, he was tackled by two officers, put on the ground, hit and kicked, and would eventually go to the hospital to get stitches in his face. Mm. The officers' accounts are quite different. According to the officers, they went out to break up a fight between my client and another guy who they later arrested, who my client wasn't talking to at the time, and in fact had never even met. There is a co-defendant in the case. They went out to break out a fight when the officer noticed that my client was intoxicated, right? Public intoxication. He attempted to arrest him, and when he did that, my client squared off against the officer with his fists balled up like he was ready to fight. And I can't remember, the term that the officer used was he took a bladed stance, okay, which was apparently like a martial art term. I mean, you can imagine he described squaring off. And the officer in his offense report was always very clear to point out that as an officer, he was very small, very slight. He put his height and weight, and he was no match against my client or another guy that they arrested. Of course, he didn't go to the hospital for stitches. My client did.
Right.
There was another officer involved in all this who, you know, to read and to later hear in court the officer's accounts, wasn't really involved in any of this until it came to the point where he needed to help put the handcuffs on. If you read their account, that didn't seem likely, but also witnesses on the scene said that both officers were very well involved in beating up my client. And I say officers, understanding that they were working off duty at the time, but they still had the right to arrest somebody without a warrant as long as they saw a crime in progress, and that would have been, according to them, the public intoxication, which, as you know, public intoxication is sort of the catch-all.
Right.
That's what happens.
That and the smell of marijuana.
Exactly. Exactly. Those are the things that happen when a cop tells you something and you don't obey in a club, for example. Right. You know, they feel like they can always get you for that because it's just a matter of their perception and whether or not you're safe. You know, you're endangering yourself or somebody else.
Right.
So both officers were, according to witnesses, were heavily involved in attacking my client and just cleaning up the sidewalk with this poor guy.
Now, where's his friend when all this is going on?
Standing there yelling.
Like, stop, stop?
Well, yes, screaming, in fact. And in fact, a co-defendant, somebody completely unrelated, came out and yelled at the officers to stop. Mm-hmm. They arrested him also for interfering. Now, that was the guy that, and this gets confusing, that was the guy that they testified was about to get in a fight with my client. But like I said, they had never met. Didn't know each other. Didn't even know each other.
So obviously the officers didn't see what really happened.
They didn't see it, they couldn't hear it, or if they did hear it, they didn't understand it because they didn't even speak the language.
Now, what club was this?
This was at Twin Peaks.
So are the wife and kids with them, or no?
No kids, just the wife.
Just the wife.
So the wife
and the buddy.
The wife and the buddy. The wife first hears the friend scream, and because they're really, you know, they're really beating up his friend. Back to the other officer quickly, though. Looking at the backgrounds of these officers, the other officer, who on paper did not seem to be very involved, was actually very involved and had been in other situations where he had been not only violent, but he had actually killed what might have been an unarmed man, depending on whose account you believe, back in 2010.
Wow. In
a case that I think today would receive much more scrutiny. You know, at the time he was not wearing his uniform. He was working an extra job for security at an apartment complex and killed someone that witnesses at the complex said did not present with a weapon at all and was compliant. But he says looked to him like he was about to get a weapon that he was holding under his seat.
Wow.
Shot him point blank.
Wow.
Point
so
blank.
He's a killer.
He is.
Wow.
And I was actually able to bring that out on cross-examination.
Wow.
The state opened the door. The state opened the door, rolled out the red carpet, valet parked my car.
What?
You know, they let me bring it in. There was an objection which was sustained, which kind of surprised me. I could have argued it, but the truth is it was out.
Wow.
You know.
How'd you get into that?
Well, the state wanted to show that it was not unusual. Not only is it legal, and the judge took judicial notice, you know, of his own accord. He sua sponte. Right. No surprise.
Right.
the state wanted to show that it was not only is it legal, but it's typical for an officer to be working an off-duty job, and they went right down the line with him. They said, you know, you've worked off-duty jobs before, yes. You've made arrests, yes. Investigated crimes, yes. And you have had to use physical force, yes.
Oh wow, that's way opening the door.
Oh yeah. So first question on cross was, I went down the same line of questioning, and I added at the end, and you killed a man, didn't you?
Wow.
And he looked like he was about to kill two men, his second man. Yeah.
Did he get to answer?
He answered.
He said yes.
And I said, and it's possible he was unarmed. And at that point there was an objection. The judge sustained it, but it didn't matter.
Right.
It didn't matter.
That's not good.
So clearly he was involved all the way through.
And clearly, because of his history, he did not want to be
That's
involved
exactly right.
on paper.
Exactly.
On the police report. But what we know as lawyers and as citizens is that police officers, when they work extra jobs, and it's two of them, it's basically required. It requires two of them to make an arrest. And so they're not going to be partnered up like that and not be together if an altercation breaks out. They're going to be together because that's why you have two officers.
Right. That makes total sense. You know, these officers were in uniform, HPD uniform, but what's interesting about that is that for their day jobs, they both work narcotics. And they're both, I think, 15 and 20-year veterans. Both work narcotics, and on cross, I asked them about the uniforms that they wear on the job, or don't wear, and it turns out they don't wear a uniform. They chose not to wear uniforms to testify. And we talked about that a little bit until they finally, the state finally objected to relevance, and we moved on. But the fact is, the only reason these two officers have uniforms is to work this second security job.
Right, because they have desk jobs now.
Right. Now, a prosecution for resisting arrest, to be successful, requires that you know it's an officer, you know you're being arrested, you intentionally resist, and knowing it's an officer, depends on what they're wearing, where they are, context, things like that. And I don't think that my client really ever knew that these were officers as opposed to security guards.
Right.
Plus it came out, this happened January 24th, 2015. Checked the weather that day, it was 34 degrees that night.
So they had jackets on.
And they both admitted that they had jackets on. It was like pulling teeth, but the one who said he had, of course, the sky blue shirt,
And then they'll say they had raid written on them, but maybe they didn't.
Well, they said that they had police written on the front. But they may have been wearing, or one of them was wearing the new sort of commando paramilitary sort of uniform. Their guns would have been covered by their jackets. They admitted that. And it was hard to tell that they were officers. Wow. And again, this was in the context not of the police being called or even announcing who they were or what they were doing, even by the officer's account. This was somebody working security who it's within his power to make an arrest under certain circumstances, but like I said, you got to know who they are and what they're doing for this charge to stick.
Right.
And you don't, open up an arrest by slamming somebody's head into the cement, or probably shouldn't. And related to that, we lost any chance of a self-defense self-defense defense on this case. I had my client testify, and it was clear that he didn't resist in any way,
And how did you make that clear?
Well, first of all, we wanted to show that, we wanted to show that he didn't know they were cops in the first place.
Okay. So that's the first issue. You didn't know they were cops.
Didn't know they were cops. Didn't know they were being arrested. And we didn't have to make very much clear other than that, because the officers had already been impeached so thoroughly, especially what I'll call the primary officer, the one who wrote the report and said that, very creative report, said that, my client squared off against him. He even says at one point that he felt that, or in the offense report, that he felt my client was reaching for his gun. On direct examination, he said that he felt a tug at his gun, which was not what he said in the offense report. It was a little further. And when I asked him on cross if he was certain of that, given all of the scuffling that he had already described on direct examination, his testimony then changed on redirect that he felt an extended pull. Like, right there in front of the jury, it went from reaching to a tug to he was really trying to get my gun right there in the parking lot of this Twin Peaks. And the jury saw through that sort of thing. And, you know, this officer in particular was indignant.
Wow.
He didn't think he should be there.
Wow.
He thought this whole thing was just silly.
Wow.
And he's the type, I think, who I consider more dangerous. I mean, it's easier to deal with somebody who knows they're doing wrong.
Right.
Than somebody who thinks they're doing the right thing, if even for the wrong reason. But he was a true believer.
Wow.
He actually said on direct that really it came down to the reason my client did not, or was arrested, and the primary indication that he was publicly intoxicated was that he did not obey my command.
Wow.
And
how arrogant is that?
Oh, arrogant. Extremely arrogant. You know.
And what was the command he did not obey? Remind me.
I don't remember exactly what it was. There were several.
Okay.
One was to leave.
Okay.
I think
take
that
your friend and leave.
Leave, yeah, take your friend and leave. Just, you know, well, he didn't know that the situation was he was taking his friend and trying to get his friend out of trouble. He thought they were about to fight.
Okay.
Or that was his testimony, at least. And again, he didn't speak Spanish.
Right.
He didn't know what they were saying. No one else who I had testified said that they were angry words at all, including people who speak Spanish. You know,
So did you have any witnesses?
Oh, I did. And in fact, one of the witnesses that I called was one of the state's witnesses, who they subpoenaed, had on call, but they did not put on the stand.
Wow.
He was my first witness.
Wow.
That was the use of force investigator,
Wow.
sergeant with HPD.
So why did you use one of the state's witnesses as your first witness?
Well, I was feeling pretty daring.
It's a misdemeanor.
I mean, yeah, it's a misdemeanor, and it really was the kind of case where I thought it was. I mean, there's no such thing as a slam dunk.
Of course.
But there really is not. But this was about as close as you can get.
Wow.
I felt. I didn't feel that the jury responded well to either officer. It was a great jury. Honestly, it was another attorney, Corey Roth, helped me pick the jury. He's done that for me before, and it's just excellent.
He's a great young lawyer.
Oh, he is, really is. If we had just been able to walk in and handpick our jury,
Wow.
as opposed to jury deselection, which is what we really do, they were exactly the people we would have selected, including the alternate.
Wow. How did y'all get so lucky?
I don't know.
What were
I
the
don't know.
views?
Actually, we had a guy who had been arrested and charged I think as a 19-year-old with resisting arrest.
Oh, wow. And he
I don't
made
know.
the jury?
He made the jury.
Wow.
He did you know, I'll say this, we tried the case essentially to the chief, or against the chief, prosecutor, or a visiting chief. I think the chief was on vacation that week. But they were using this case to train a new prosecutor. And I've seen this happen before. I've never had this happen in a case, but I've seen it happen to other attorneys, where a case that probably should have been dismissed, and I think certainly this case should not have gone to trial, it should have been dismissed, given the inconsistencies that we knew in the case. And I don't share what my defense will be ever with the prosecution, but I thought, you know, if they're reading the same documents I'm reading, and a lot of these are documents they're giving to me, they know the inconsistencies,
Right.
They sense that these guys are lying, and I can't believe we're going to go to trial on this.
Right.
But there was a new prosecutor who needed trial experience. This was her first trial. So another reason why, you know, I don't claim any great victory, although we were really trying it against the chief who was sitting next to her and helping her. But, you know, as I've said many times before, sometimes the DA's office will train new prosecutors by giving them cases that they can't possibly win. And if they do, great. But if they don't, they shouldn't feel too bad. And it's like a mother cat teaching her kittens how to kill prey. She gives them a live mouse and lets them play with it until they figure it out. The problem is that my client, and we went to trial fairly quickly because we said, you know, one reason was we said early on, dismiss it or we're going to go to trial. Right. And we made good. But, you know, this was just unconscionable because my client went through an accusation, a charge. He had this hanging over his head. He missed work. You know, officers who came in to testify were getting paid. He was losing time at work. He's hourly. The prosecutors didn't take any interest in the fact that on a case which they knew was nothing, and they had been kicked, we knew that they were kicking from prosecutor to prosecutor because nobody wanted it. It was a difficult case. You know, they really screwed with somebody for a while with this.
And let me tell you what I think about that and get more of your idea about that. When the prosecution will say, well, even if we don't win, they learned a lot from trying a case from a good lawyer. I used to get that all the time. I still do.
Right.
And I hate that because this is somebody's life. This is not a game.
Right.
You know, we have 20,000 people in that jail, and about 10,000 of them need trials. And they are serious crimes. That's why they can't bond out. Those are the ones that if you need some trial experience, you go to trial on those. But you don't play with people's lives when you know these cops are lying. Those cops should have just taken him in for PI if they wanted to, if they were mad at him. But the problem is, I've been a hearing examiner for the city of Houston where the police filed grievances on each other. And if they couldn't take that guy to jail after they whooped his butt, if they'd have taken him to jail after whooping his butt without any charging of resisting arrest. So anytime the cops beat you up, they're going to either charge you with resisting arrest or aggravated assault on a peace officer. Because otherwise they can't justify why this guy is coming to jail with wounds on him. And they beat your client up pretty bad.
They did. And in fact, the jail turned him away.
Wow.
Because now they did have an ambulance come out and check him out and patch him up. Now the officers in the offense report and on the stand could never account for how he
got injured.
Well, they just turned around and suddenly his face is just covered with blood. No idea how that happened. They took him to the jail. Well, he was sort of patched up, driven around for quite a while with the windows down, by the way, to the jail. Jail turned him away and said, take him to Ben Taub and bring him back when he's good. And so that's what they did.
So did you have his medical records?
We are getting those. He has other things pending.
Okay.
We have the doctor if we needed him to testify, but we didn't need all that. It was enough. The jury, the bottom line was the jury.
Did y'all have any pictures of his face?
Oh yes, we did.
Who took pictures?
Oh, we had his intake picture from the jail.
His booking photo was ugly.
The booking photo. Oh, absolutely.
Because remember, this cop is a killer. So, you know, and that's
right.
An issue. I mean, that's
it
really
is.
An issue when you have a cop that has killed before in an off-duty capacity when he's working an extra job, and now he's at a club and beating people up, and
right.
they're having to go to the hospital. I mean, that's a violent trend.
It is.
That should be costly for the city.
It should be.
The city should
well
really be looking at him.
Yes. Oh, I agree. I agree. In fact, a history like that can make a city liable where they wouldn't be otherwise, from what I understand. I mean, I know that you don't sue people, and I don't. But this is bad. This is bad.
As a citizen, it's bad.
It is.
You know, because it could happen to me or you or
absolutely.
anybody that we know when an officer allows his bad judgment and adrenaline to take over a situation.
And that was important. I want to be sure and come back to the officer who came and investigated use of force. But
sure.
But what you just raised is interesting because one of the questions I asked one of the officers on cross-examination, we were dealing with flooding, so this was actually the second day of cross-examination of an officer on a Class A. You know, we don't normally do 2 days of cross on.
Right.
You know.
right. I don't know how you got there, but.
Well, I said to him.
Sounds like you got a lot of practice too, in addition to the prosecutor.
It was fun. You know.
All right.
Not at my client's expense, given that we had to be there.
But fun to experience what you've studied so long to do.
True. One of the questions that I asked one of the officers to sort of set up the context for what he's doing and when he's doing it and where he's doing it and the frustration that he probably experiences, is I said, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but Twin Peaks is about mountains as the name Hooters is about birds, right?
Right.
So we had a testosterone-filled, beer-filled bar. After he's worked narcotics, about a 10, 12-hour shift on narcotics, then he takes a little break, then he comes to this job. So he's got to be frustrated. He's got to be at the end of his rope. And this guy both of these guys, in fact, they're fighters. They're thugs.
Wow.
There's no question that they're thugs.
Wow.
We don't know how many times this has happened that nobody has complained.
Right.
You know, or that nobody has even fought the charges.
Right.
That's what's scary because there are too many people who take this kind of treatment for granted.
Right. Or they can't afford the trial.
Or can't afford it.
And the DAs will give them time served and they just have it on the record.
Sure, and that's exactly, or deferred.
Or deferred.
Which is, which is a setup, and it's really an unfair deal if you didn't do something.
You didn't do it.
So it was a stressful, I'd say, for an officer. And let's face it, there's a reason they've got 2 HPD officers out front and not 2 just security guards.
Right.
You know, And they'd been working at this location, I think, for like 7 years or so.
Oh, wow. So they have a good time.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, yes. So the investigator, or the sergeant that came out to investigate the use of force, his investigation essentially consisted of asking the officers if they believed the force they used was necessary given the resistance that they received. And you'll be amazed to learn that they thought the amount of force they used was exactly what they should have used.
Well, really?
Yeah. Oddly enough. Yeah.
So they used the right amount of force to take in a guy that was a danger to himself and others.
Whose wife said she could take him home, by the way.
Right.
Which means they didn't have to arrest him for this Class C public intoxication.
Right, because he's under control with his friend and his wife.
Exactly.
And you had to take him in and beat him up in front of his wife.
Right.
How humiliating can that be?
I can only imagine.
The police are, I mean, they just don't think about what they're doing to families. You know, like,
True.
I think we're going to pay heavily for, and handsomely for, this era of 80s and 90s and 2000s locking up people for just drugs. Because you've destroyed families and communities, and for what? What have you accomplished by doing this? And it's the same thing. If an officer goes too far, I mean, I understand it's a difficult job, and you have to know when to use force, because force is necessary. But usually at bars and clubs, when people come there, they're coming to have a good time. They're not coming to get beat up. They're not coming to fight with the police. And we have to have police officers that can handle someone saying screw you or F you, or, you know, they're going to have, people are going to be belligerent, but that's no reason for you to use force.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's the problem. Officers feel like because they have a badge sometime and then they don't have good training or self-control, that they can use force and create the story as they go along.
If you're offended by name calling, you probably should not be an attorney or a cop.
An attorney or a cop. Let me tell you this, police officers, the ones who watch this and hate me for saying it, we get cussed out a lot too.
Oh,
absolutely. We get talked to ugly, we get treated badly, and we still have to defend the people that are talking to us like this a lot of times, or their family members.
And I'm guessing you've yet to kick anyone's ass, literally. who has talked that way to you.
No, I haven't, but I have cussed them out. But
well, talking to a friend about the case in McKinney, Texas, with the girl in the bikini who was just yesterday, in fact, a friend of mine said, well, you know, that girl must have said something to him.
Right.
And of course, my friend understood that didn't justify anything the cop did. But it really is more offensive that maybe she did, and he couldn't take whatever she might have said. I actually don't think she said anything. The
only thing I saw her do, and we showed it on here, is she's already on the curb when he pulls her.
Right.
And she's talking loud about her mama, like, I'm going to call my mama. But one of the things I'm hearing the officer say is, y'all go home. So if you're a teenager and your mama drop you off, how are you going to get home?
Right.
I mean, so that's, I guess what pains me at my age and where we are in society is that a lot of white and Hispanic people don't see our black children the same. And that's what hurts, because there's not a white person I know that if I can ask them to honestly put themselves in that child's position, or if it was their 13-year-old, would you want them to be handled that way? And that's what hurts me, is the media will go crazy and like, well, she should have said this or she did this. But would you really want your 13-year-old, who's a sassy mouth, for the police officers to, that child has never had a man put her hands on her, and to have a man tugging on your hair and putting your face in the grass and treating you like an animal.
She was violated.
She was violated. And for people to even say they didn't see the violation is always
right.
I mean, to me, and let me just say this, because we're trying to talk out our issues so that we can have a healthier society, Houston, Harris County, and a healthier criminal justice system. If you treat someone like that and tell them what she should have said anything to a black person, that just means you're a racist. I mean, because I'm just saying, because you're not saying, because I want to hear somebody white say, well, I would have expected my daughter to have her face put in the ground if she talked back to the officer. Right. But I've yet to hear one of my friends say that, and that's what's painful to us. Right,
right. Well, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about there are people who consider this sort of treatment to be a matter of course, or at least something that they cannot fight against.
The classism we live in.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Because of his class, he should be able to take an ass whooping like that. And it's not fair. It's not right, because you wouldn't do that if you were on Washington Avenue and somebody's belligerent with you. You might make them go home, but we don't have a whole bunch of cases like that where we're getting called because somebody got their face kicked in and they're cussing on Washington Avenue or on Westheimer. That's not going to happen.
The officers in this case made a big deal about the fact that after, the dust settled and they've got my client on the floor with his hands behind his back, bleeding from his face, any other officers who arrived later, including the one who did the investigation for use of force, made a big point of saying that he was yelling at the officers, you know, things like, take my handcuffs off, you know, now that I've got a chance, I'm going to kick your ass, you know.
Really?
Yeah.
And they really believe somebody's going to do that?
Right. And whether or not he was saying that, you know, they had to acknowledge.
I mean, he might have been also talking to his wife or something too. But,
right,
okay, like
but they
you said,
also,
whether or not
they also had to acknowledge that he just got his butt kicked, and he's going to be mad.
Right.
You know, it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that he got jumped. He basically got sucker punched.
Right. With police officers, you know, you really can't fight back because they have guns and they can shoot you. I mean,
right.
You can try to stop them and get them off of you, but you can't really swing on a cop like you'd swing on a normal person that's beating your butt.
Right. And, you know, the law is that you cannot, I mean, the self-defense in cases like this is very limited. You know, you have to show that the cop came at you with too much force when he was going to arrest you, given that you know, and plus you have to know he's a cop, all that other stuff. But, you know, it's the fact that the arrest is unlawful, even if you know that, chances are good that a lot of people know more law than the cop does, or that can happen. You know that the arrest is unlawful. That's not a defense to resisting. Right. So as citizens, we're really stuck, you know.
Right, we're stuck.
You know, we have to comply. Even if it's unreasonable, even if it's unlawful, we have to comply unless we can sort of prejudge that he's coming at me with too much force, then maybe I can defend myself.
And let me tell you what's even more classist about the way our society is turning and nonsensical is that we want open carry laws of guns. We want to have guns everywhere, but yet we know that if I really had a gun and you can just shoot me because you think I have a gun or you think I'm putting my hands toward it, but it's only going to be certain segments or classes of society that's going to be shot. But everybody in society has a gun, and you never see, I mean, I know more of my upper middle class friends who have guns and concealed hand license and who have guns on them than, you know, neighborhood people. But yet you don't see officers dealing with them like that, and they know on a traffic stop they have these concealed weapons, but they're not worrying about if they reach for something. So it's all about perception. Because they could be reaching for something too. I mean, you know, I mean, they know they have a gun. Right. And so it's just troubling to me that officers get no bill because they think they saw them reach for something, but yet you want everybody to be armed.
That's a scary. It's a
scary, nonsensical.
It is.
Illogical way to proceed as citizens. Right.
And you know, the race issue is an issue, and I find myself saying, as a defense attorney, things like, you know, I wouldn't believe what I'm telling you if I didn't do this. If I didn't do this for a living. Right. You know, if I weren't a criminal defense attorney,
because white males don't want to believe that this is the way it is. Because, you know, we have come to a point in society where people think that black people are just playing the race card, because that's just the easy way to do it. And I'm sure it would be comfortable. If I was white, I'd probably think that too. But you have to know what's going on. Like, remember, everybody's saying, oh, well, the officers are getting out of control because things are caught on camera. Now, remember, officers used to take your cameras. We just had a United States Supreme Court case that said officers can't take people can film what officers are doing. And until then, officers, as a matter of course, would run and grab people's cameras or their cell phones and delete them.
Well, you'll notice I haven't said anything about a video in this case. Right. My client's wife attempted to take a video, and her phone was slapped out of her hand, and she was pushed away from her phone.
I'm sure. Yeah. Because the old school cops are going to make sure that that happens. Because I've had someone arrested recently, and he was videoing everything the officers did until they came and grabbed him, and he got his phone back, but that video was deleted. So now they're just tampering with the evidence. Right. So.
And you know, I was talking to an uncle I hadn't seen in a while the other day, who you might be surprised to know is white.
Surprise, Paul.
And I told him about this case. You know, it was just irrefutable. Irrefutable that the police had acted wrongly, you know. And he said, well, gosh, it's too bad that happened, but luckily that almost never happens. You know, and I said, no. And that's when I said, you know, if I didn't do this for a living, I might agree with you, but it happens all the time. We don't even know how much it happens.
Right, and the only reason why we know more is because officers who are trying to follow the law know not to take people's cameras, because they've been educated on the new Supreme Court case. Yes. And so they know, just like they were educated for years about when, you know, there was furtive gestures, because, you know, it's interesting how officers use the exact Supreme Court language and the smell. And so, but now they know you can't take people's cameras. And so now they don't take them if they're trying to follow the law, like the cops that'll go past the boundaries or that are unethical and that don't follow their own internal policies, they still will. And that's the ones that you have right here. That guy's a killer. He is too aggressive, and they're going to take the liberties they want to and not follow the law.
Right.
So the only thing we're protected with someone like him is if they can, your underserved client or your poor client can get to Twin Peaks fast enough to get the video.
And that was interesting.
But I'm sure it wasn't available.
It was not available.
Oh, I'm sure.
And the officer who investigated use of force he discovered that there might be video. Of course, a lot of this happened in the parking lot, and I went myself and looked, and there were not parking lot cameras.
Sometimes off the buildings, they reflect the parking lot.
Or there must have been something that showed out the front doors, and that could have, we could have seen something. I've had cases where you saw a pretty good reflection in a car window. So the officer who investigated use of force, who only talked to the officers who used the force and oddly enough determined it was appropriate, and didn't interview anyone else, no other patrons.
No witnesses,
no
not
witnesses.
The guy's wife.
No. He did ask the manager if there was a video. The manager said, yeah, I'll have to talk to management to get it. I don't have access to it. He never followed up on it.
Of course not.
Which really worked well for us. Resisting arrest is so broad. The courts have said that it has to be force against an officer, but it can also be pulling away.
And let me tell you what's interesting. When I first became a lawyer, pulling away was not resisting arrest. That's what the case law said.
And now they've sort of nuanced that.
And now they've changed it. So now people are telling me, and see, I haven't read that case, but they're saying even pulling away. And I remember when I first became a prosecutor in '92, it said pulling away, and there was even resisting is not pulling, because the logic was a person's natural reaction is to pull away if someone is doing it. So that wasn't resisting. It had to actually be a use of force.
Yes.
And not pulling away.
And that's the
and
use
now
of force.
It's changed.
It has changed. And they've tried to nuance it, and it's just more confusing than ever. I mean, now it's, I think, pulling away in and of itself may not be. And I think one initial pull is all you get. But if you continue to pull or flail or whatever, then it's resisting. That's defined, or that falls under the definition of force against, which is absurd.
That's absurd.
It's absurd.
It's absurd.
I didn't want to get into those nuances with the jury.
Right. It's too complicated.
Right. And if, in this case...
If it was a close case, maybe.
Right. But this wasn't close. And luckily, we had officers who performed even better than I expected. Like I said, this was not a difficult trial.
Sometimes the arrogance of an officer that's over-prosecuting someone that you can tell is just a poor dude trying to work, it's just too much.
Right.
This is not a murder case. It's not a robbery case.
No. Maybe the most excitement these officers have had in a while, but that's part of the problem too, is they feel like they're not getting enough action somehow, police action, and so they're just too gung-ho. And you're right when you say that these guys are the types of officers who, no matter what the Supreme Court says, they don't care. Right. They don't care what the rules are. They like going out and being thugs.
They're thugs, right? When you get into the undercovers. And a lot of they're so used to going undercover and playing thugs and narcotics officers. They're used to playing thugs so much that they are thugs.
Absolutely.
And the lines are blurred, and they say whatever they need to say to fit the situation.
Right.
And that's what's hurt me so bad as a lawyer, because when I went to law school and studied cases, the courts actually gave us direction on what the law is and how it's to be interpreted, and so how the rules were supposed to be played, what an officer's supposed to do, what everybody's supposed to do. But now it's like whatever happens, then they have to rewrite the interpretation to fit what the officers have said. And these Supreme Courts and courts of appeals have protected these thugs for so long that we have no notice as to what the law is. You don't know what it is.
That's true. That's true. And something I learned very, very early on in a case like this, where you think it's as close to a slam dunk as you can probably get, is that you don't tell what your defense is. I mean, I never do. I never give away my defense, but especially in a case where the prosecutor is going to go fix the story with the officer.
And that's so sad. They're going to go tell the officer, well, let me call the officer. That's the first thing they say.
Right.
And so it's not, he didn't write it in the report, so it wasn't important. So you say, well, the prosecutor says, well, the defense lawyer is saying so-and-so, and then they fix it.
Oh, yeah. And by fixing it, it could be a completely different story.
Right. And jurors don't really care, because they just can't, like your father, they can't believe that an officer would do that. Why would they change?
Right.
Why would the prosecutor tell them to change their story? What can they gain by lying on your client? That's what people
I'm going to get in trouble. It was my uncle, not my dad.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Your
I'm
uncle.
kidding. But, that's a big argument. What can they gain by lying? An argument actually that the judge in his, I wouldn't go so far as to say that he prosecuted from the bench. He actually gave us a fair trial. And by that I mean I got most of the objections called in my favor that I made.
That's great. That's good.
But there were some other things that where he was giving some assistance
Right.
To the other side. And, you know, he made points, at least at the bench, that, you know, why would they hire cops who would be doing this? Because this is bad for business, beating up clients. So how could this have possibly happened? And that was actually an argument that went from the bench to the jury later in final arguments. That, you know, the jury just didn't buy it. But in a case that wasn't, in a tighter case, a closer case, I think that might have been a problem.
Right, and the fact that you were able to talk about him killing somebody before, I mean, that just shows he goes too far.
I couldn't believe what a gift that was.
Oh.
You know, I would have tried to bring it in anyway, but the fact that they opened the door so...
they didn't know.
Right.
They had no idea. They asked those standard questions not knowing.
Well, you know, that's true.
I'm sure they didn't know he'd killed somebody before.
No, I don't think they did. Although 2 prosecutors ago in this case, there have been 3 prosecutors before we got to trial, I did mention that I did mention
this. It should
this.
have been in the file.
You know, yeah. I know that they spoke with the officers. I almost called the last prosecutor to the stand to impeach the officer because he had alleged that he was injured. In his offense report, he was not injured. He didn't say that he was injured. In the use of force report that the sergeant that I mentioned took, he has to put whether he was injured or not. He said, no, I wasn't injured. Wow. But he took the stand and you know, the poor guy was just in terrible shape. He could barely move the next day. He was so beat up.
Wow.
So that was the other reason that I brought the use of force investigator to the stand, was to impeach that testimony by one of the officers.
So tell me how that went with the use of force officer. How did that go?
Well, they did, as I said, the state didn't call him. I relied on their subpoena, and I got the number from the chief prosecutor, who just looked dumbfounded. He couldn't believe I was going to call the guy. I called the officer and I said, "This is the defense attorney. I'd like you to come in. You're on call." It was a 30-minute call. He had to be there. So he said, "Can you have the prosecutor call me?" You know, he was very unsure about this. I didn't treat him as a witness who I would cross. I wasn't as rough with him as I'd been with the other 2 officers. Because he didn't deserve it, and I needed him. He was honest. He didn't want to be there, but he was honest and fair. The state, I think, thought that I must have been some kind of an idiot, you know.
Well, how did you use him to your advantage?
Well, he, as I said, he had made the report, the use of force report, that said that the other officer had not been hurt.
And did you have that report?
I did, and he brought it with him.
And did you have it prior to that?
Oh, I did. Oh, of course. Yeah, that was part and parcel of the offense report. Okay. So I did get that. So that was one way that I used him. The other way was actually to show how incomplete his investigation was, and that it only involved asking the officers what their opinion of the use of force was, and that he could have interviewed other patrons and he didn't, that he asked once about the videotape and didn't follow up. He was told that there was a videotape, but you know, the manager would have to email his upper management, and then he never followed up on that. On cross, they tried to spin it as though there was no tape, and we clarified on redirect that in fact there might have been a tape. It wasn't that there wasn't one, he just didn't follow up, so he didn't know. And so he didn't complete, there wasn't a full investigation. And in fact, if they wanted to show that my client did everything that was alleged, they might have been able to show it. One thing that we think might have been on the tape that didn't come up until late, my client was a part of the story that I had not heard from my client, was exactly how he had his head busted open. And that was that one of the officers, and this actually inside the restaurant, and this was like the day before trial I find this out, stood him up and kicked his legs out from under him, and he just planted face first.
Oh my God,
on the cement.
how violent is that? That's probably that killer that did that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh my
it was.
God.
It was
a killer, yeah, he's a killer.
The other officer, frankly, was just as small and slight as he described himself in the offense report. So I didn't see him really going after anybody the way that they, not alone anyway. You know, it was sort of a mice and men sort of thing between these officers.
Oh my God, that guy's dangerous.
He is. There's a whole other half of this story. I think the co-defendant goes to trial in August. which is amazing to me. They're going to try the other case.
Who had nothing to do with anything.
Nothing to do with anything other than to come out and
say, please stop.
Please stop. And then he ran back in. They chased him in, and there's a knockdown drag out with him grabbing bar stools and just trying not to get drug out by these two officers. And that was interfering with the duties of a public servant, obviously.
Those same officers had to chase him, so he's interfering so bad that you have to go inside when he's inside.
Well, and he did just witness them do some damage, some pretty good damage to somebody.
So we'll let you know what happens to you.
Right, and the fact is they went in after him because apparently he said he was going to call 911 or get some help or something. It's pretty bad.
They came in to stop him from getting help.
Exactly.
And so he becomes now the interferer.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Trying to help his friend or someone he saw. He wasn't even his friend. He didn't know him, did he?
Wasn't even. They didn't even know each other. Never met.
I'm glad whoever's trying that case is trying it and not letting that guy plead either.
Absolutely. I mean, the other attorney's stance was exactly the same as mine. We discussed the case early on. I could have had him testify, but didn't.
Yeah, just let him have his day.
Let him have his day, exactly. And didn't need him anyway. Right. But the poor guy. I mean, he gets chased around a restaurant.
And arrested. Beat up too.
Right. Right.
Oh my God.
It's interesting. They took the two to jail separately, separate cars. They called the wagon, or the paddy wagon, for my client. Drove my client around for quite a while with the windows down in 34-degree weather. I can only guess to make the swelling go down.
I don't know.
Before they went to jail, and then, as I said, he was turned away and taken to Ben Taub. He didn't make it to the jail, I think, until 5 o'clock the next morning. This all happened at midnight. So he was really. Even before we get to the part where he's got to endure having this charge over his head, miss work, and have people think that he might be a criminal, there's really no presumption of innocence.
Right,
right.
Now,
in
you're
any
presumed
case.
guilty.
Right.
Right.
He goes through all this in addition to getting beat up in front of his wife and friend. It's just, the entire experience was just humiliating.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's just terrible. It's terrible. It's interesting, callers. We haven't gotten any calls tonight. We usually do get calls. Hopefully our phones are working tonight. But thank you for standing by because you think it's a very interesting story. Because I think it's a very interesting story. It's interesting to know that you could go out for a good time with your wife and friend and end up beat up with a busted head, probably still suffering now, and it's 6 months later. Right. Having to pay a lawyer, bond out. I mean, that's just an awful experience. Someone that didn't even have a record.
Right, no record at all.
But let's talk about this. Once you get a not guilty in a misdemeanor court, you have an automatic right to expunction. So talk about that.
So he gets to have his case expunged. It can be erased from his record, as if he's allowed to say effectively that it never happened.
Right. So do they still give you the paperwork in misdemeanor court, or do you have to go across the street?
We have to go across the street.
Civil.
The judge, even before he read the verdict, which was sort of a giveaway, did tell him that he had the right to an expunction.
He said that before he read the verdict?
He did, and then quickly added, but that's not a statement of, what the verdict is. So he read the verdict, handed it back to the bailiff to give, and, and then made that statement and then quickly said that's not an indication. I kind of took it as an indication, but we felt pretty good to begin with, although you just don't know until they read the verdict.
Don't know until they read that verdict.
We did go in and talk to the jury afterward.
Okay.
And the bottom line was they just didn't believe the officers.
And why not? What was your sense?
Well, my sense was they were bullies. It was clear that they were bullies. Their story changed enough from the night that it happened to when they testified that alone was enough to make them unbelievable. But also, some of the stories changed on the stand.
That's crazy.
From the more they talked, the better it got.
We actually got a call now.
Oh, good.
So, caller, thank you for calling Truth and Justice with Vivian King. You're on. State your comment.
Hi, this is Mrs. Rogers speaking, and I'd like to say, would you all have a good topic tonight about the police and all of that? But the thing they need to do when they find these police lying, all the pension, everything they're supposed to get farmed, and they can't get into that. They'll stop and uphold the law much better. Because as long as they know they can get their pension and stuff when they leave there, they're going to keep on doing it.
I agree. Something needs to be done. And one of the things I do, Ms. Rogers, is put this show on so you'll know what's going on in your police department so that you can, now it's an election time, so you can make sure you hold your city council people accountable to this. You make sure that you tell them we want people fired if they are violating people's rights. I mean, when people are asking for your vote, like the mayors, Adrian Garcia is running, Sylvester Turner is running. a lot of different people are running, so and they're running for city councilman. So you make sure, because the police report to the mayor. The mayor appoints the police chief and the policies, and the city council control this. So I agree with you, they should be fired, but you have to have a city government that will fire them.
That's correct. And another thing, they need to put their pictures on the TV and let everybody know what kind of bad cop it is. If they start flashing their pictures on the TV like they do with the criminals, they'll stop a lot of that.
I like how you think, Ms. Rogers.
That's a good idea. Really, Ms. Rogers, that's a good idea. If you saw their pictures, like you put everybody else's picture up there, you're right.
That's right.
That's right. You are so right about that. That's a good idea.
And when the people are running, make them start putting their pictures on the thing, not just their name when they run it. The mayor, whoever run it, they need to put their picture, who they are running. People forget names, but they won't forget faces.
That's true.
True.
That's true. I want that to be your committee. You need to do that. When you're out in your civic meetings and you're at church, you tell people that's what we want. You got to ask for it. We're the government. We are the government, and they work for us. And so we have to keep reminding people.
We the people, we can change it if we want to, you know.
We sure can.
Well, and that's a good point. In some way, even I'm responsible for the fact that my client got beat up that night, because these cops have had these jobs for a long time.
That's right.
And yeah, and somebody keeps them on the force.
Right.
You know, you heard about the investigation.
We got to know what course we're going and what judge. We keep seeing that same judge letting people off and telling the prosecutor what they should say, what you should do. He's not upholding that law. I'm sorry.
You're right. But the thing is, we got to get people engaged and listen. And so this is my step to do it. You know, I rerun these shows on YouTube at youtube.com/user.
Okay.
/Vivian R. King. And so you need to spread the word, pass the pictures around, pass the shows around, and tell people to get involved, get engaged. That's my point in trying to do this. So
you're correct. You're correct.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rogers, for your call.
I call you all the time.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Vivian. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Again, you know, these officers who work narcotics during the day, security job at night, they're not far removed from the people that we elect. Not as far as maybe we perceive. And you know, that's the way we get this done, whether it's the police chief overrunning a pedestrian or these two relatively little guys beating people up during their off-duty.
Right.
You know,
well, if people brought it to the city council, it would be an issue.
Right.
And when we vote for mayors, if the mayor said he's going to get a police chief that can follow the rules and follow the law, I mean, you can be accountable. Because see, under this administration, the mayor has not let the police chief even come around to all of these shootings and things, because she doesn't, it's not an issue for her. And so they can be told what to do and what not to do and what policies to uphold and what, I mean, because this use of force coming to the scene is pretty new. I've never really known of that to happen, so that's pretty new, but it sounds like it's just a BS extra layer to show that they care. But
apparently
that the person,
so.
But I mean, cops just have a hard time policing each other. I mean, they just have a hard time doing it. So it has to be a different body doing that.
Right. And obviously, you know, this guy didn't do much of an investigation, this sergeant. It was interesting because I had assumed before trial that he was dispatched, and he corrected me during trial that he had not been dispatched to this, that he heard it on the radio and came of his own accord.
Interesting.
It was interesting, and it was fortunate. Could have been more fortunate maybe if he'd done a complete investigation,
right.
You know, an impartial investigation. Maybe we would never have gone to trial. Maybe there wouldn't have been a charge. But as it happens, it worked given the circumstances that we had.
Right. It's unfortunate your client had to go through that. But
exactly.
At least, I know when I used to get a lot of resisting arrest cases, I used to make people file charges. I mean, file IAD complaints. Now,
yes.
when you do it, they go after them full force in the trial. But, I mean, I just think that, I mean, I know your client probably doesn't want to, but he needs to now. I mean, I know he doesn't want to, because we know once we do it, we become targets. But during these times, and times are changing, we need to let them know that we're not standing for that. And a jury found them not to be credible. Right.
Well, I called this client after the trial, and you know, nobody is, when they've been through this, when they get a not guilty.
And you got your ass whipped by the cops. I mean, you scared of them.
Oh, exactly.
You're scared of retaliation.
And when you get a dismissal or a not guilty, they're not jumping for joy.
No.
They've been through hell.
They've been through hell. They've been in court forever. They've taken off work. They've missed money.
Right, right. So, you know, I might celebrate it, but it's nothing to celebrate for him. It's the way things should be, given what's happened.
Right.
You know, we're back to maybe where he was, but he was pretty fired up about doing more about this after the trial.
Well, at least he got his day in court, and he had an excellent lawyer like you to represent him and fight for him. And I hope that his co-defendant, who's really not a co-defendant, has his trial.
He's really not.
Really not a co-defendant because he doesn't know him, and they weren't engaged in the same criminal activity.
Right.
They both were PI with their wife and friend, I guess.
Exactly.
And I don't know. Well, we have 2 minutes, so if you have anything you want to say in the last 2 minutes about your case or the system or whatever you want to say.
Well, I think it's, you know, this is happening so much. You know, it's at least in the media so much.
Right.
And I don't think that that's an indication that it happens more or less.
Right.
It's an indication that we're learning more about it, but I think it's probably, you know, I think we should err on this side. It's probably just the tip of the iceberg, because there are so many who are not capable of fighting this sort of thing, that or just willing to take an unreasonably good deal from the DA's office, you know, or are accustomed to just getting harassed by the police, if not beat up. That this happens probably much more than is reported, and it's scary because these are, I distinguish people who do bad things and they know it's bad, and I think they're easier to deal with than people in official capacities who think they're doing the right things and they don't mind doing bad things to accomplish what they perceive as a good result. And I think people like these guys are dangerous. You know, I think, as you said, they're accustomed in their narcotics role to probably not just bending the rules but breaking them.
Right.
You know, and the public watches TV, and we like that kind of cop, you know, on CSI and things like that, who goes rogue and, you know, just has a gut feeling and he's right. But that's not the way it works in reality, and we really need to be, as you said, voting and knowledgeable about what's going on out there.
And holding our police officers accountable.
Exactly.
And like you said, a person with that short of a temper shouldn't be a cop.
No, no. You ought to be able to take some bad words, some name calling, some a lot of things.
Right, and that's what you banter with your partners about that. I mean, as lawyers, we have to stick together and say, you know what they call me today. I mean, we have to have that camaraderie so that we can stay tough and remember what our role is. And I just think officers need to do that. Well, I'm getting the buzz to wrap up. So I will say thank you, Paul, for being a fighter. Thanks for getting out there and fighting for the little man. I'm sure you didn't get paid the money you should have gotten for fighting that case. I've done that myself. I've tried many of resisting arrest cases, won them because I believed in them when the people didn't want to do it. And a lot of people are in this game just for the money, which we all need the money to take care of our families.
True.
But to know that you took that for a man who was probably an hourly worker, missing his job, couldn't afford to really pay you what you deserved, and that you didn't let him take a case on his record with time served.
Absolutely not.
And kept him to be an honest citizen by holding the state to their burden of proof. I appreciate you. I applaud you for defending the Constitution and the citizens of the United States and Houston. So thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. I'm fired up by it. So thank you for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King, and we'll give you another show next week. Thank you for watching. Case closed. Thank you for tuning in again. Tonight we have something really good, a hot topic in the news this week. He's been charged with crime. This is a show where I try to educate.